The first time the whispers came through the baby monitor, it was just past midnight. Emily had just settled onto the couch, hoping to steal a few minutes of rest before Ava's next feeding. The baby monitor, a cheap plastic unit with a flickering green light, sat quietly beside her on the armrest. Then came the sound, not a cry, not a coo, but something low and deliberate, a whisper, faint like someone breathing words into a tunnel. She sat up slowly, leaning closer to the device. Static filled her ears at first, but then the whisper returned. A word, maybe two. She couldn't quite catch it. Thinking it was a fluke, maybe a neighbor's device crossing frequencies, she brushed it off and stood to check on the baby. The nursery was dark and still. Ava slept peacefully, her chest rising and falling in rhythm with the lullaby still playing from the mobile above the crib. Everything appeared normal. Emily returned to the living room, eyes heavy with fatigue. She stared at the monitor again. It remained silent, but as she reached to dim the lamp, another whisper broke the quiet. This time it was clearer, closer. "Come here," it said. She froze, hand hovering over the switch. Her eyes flicked to the hallway that led to the nursery. A chill ran down her spine. She pressed the monitor against her ear, listening harder. The voice had stopped. She waited, heartbeat thudding in her chest, but the silence returned. For the next hour, she sat still, eyes fixed on the blinking light of the monitor, ears tuned to every flicker of sound. Over the next few nights, the whispers grew more frequent. Always around the same time, always in the same hushed tone. What unsettled her most wasn't the words themselves, it was the way they were spoken, almost affectionate, as though someone knew the baby intimately, knew her name, knew when she stirred in her sleep. Once the monitor whispered a lullaby one Emily didn't recognize, a slow, ancient tune that left a sickly feeling in her stomach. She tried changing frequencies. She tried unplugging it and plugging it back in. Nothing worked. And when she began to question her own mind, wondering if exhaustion was playing tricks on her, the monitor whispered back her name in that same slow breath, like someone had been watching her for longer than she realized. The voice didn't just whisper nonsense, it spoke with intention, addressing the baby as if it knew her. The first time Emily heard it clearly, she was standing in the kitchen, bottle in hand, when the monitor hissed and then came alive with a voice so soft it barely registered. "Ava. Little Ava. I see you," it said, the words drawn out. Loving but chilling, Emily's stomach clenched. She ran to the nursery, but the room was empty except for her sleeping daughter. No signs of anyone, nothing out of place. She tried to dismiss it again, but doubt had started creeping in. The next night, the voice came earlier. "It's okay. I'll stay with you until she comes back," it whispered, as though comforting the baby while Emily had stepped away. It sounded like a caretaker, but there was something twisted beneath the sweetness, something ancient and cold pretending to be gentle. Emily began to notice changes in Ava's sleep. The baby would stir and smile faintly in her sleep, almost as if reacting to someone being there, soothing her. At times, Ava would giggle into the darkness, reaching up toward the air above her crib, as if trying to grasp invisible fingers. Every time Emily confronted the voice by calling out, by replacing the monitor, by moving it to a different room, it returned, sometimes stronger, sometimes whispering more details. "She dreams of the woods," it said one night. "She belongs with us." The monitor would crackle, then go quiet, leaving Emily clutching Ava tightly, unsure of what was watching, or why it spoke to her daughter like an old friend. There was no explanation that made sense, and yet every word spoken through the monitor seemed to pull Ava further into something unseen, something waiting just beyond the veil of the ordinary Emily had enough. The whispers, the lullabies, the strange phrases were no longer ignorable. One night, as soon as Eva was asleep, she unplugged the baby monitor completely. Then, just to be sure, she removed the batteries and left the device lifeless on the shelf. She wanted silence. She needed peace. For a while, she believed that maybe it was over. The quiet was unfamiliar but comforting, until, in the middle of the night, a whisper echoed from the nursery once again. Her blood ran cold. She had destroyed the source. There was no power left in the monitor, no way it could transmit anything. And yet the voice returned, softer but unmistakably present. Still watching, it said, always watching. Emily bolted upright and rushed into Ava's room. The baby slept peacefully, her fingers curled around the edge of her blanket. The unplugged monitor, still resting on the shelf, sat dark and dead. But the sound hadn't come from the hallway or the floorboards. It had come from the device itself. She picked it up, stared at the black screen, and dropped it when a sudden burst of static hissed from its speaker. Her heart pounded. She stepped back, slowly. The screen flickered on, pale green with no power source connected. A tiny red light blinked once, twice, then held steady dot from the monitor came another whisper, this one almost playful. "You can't turn me off." She backed out of the room, holding Ava tightly in her arms, trembling as the monitor continued to emit sound without any visible source of energy. The old wiring in the house, maybe? An old signal trapped in a loop? She tried to find logic, but the more she tried to reason, the clearer it became that this wasn't about faulty devices or cross frequencies anymore. Something had found a way through the night. The door slammed shut. The air in the nursery had already felt wrong, heavy, still. Emily had just laid Ava back in the crib after a late night feeding and was adjusting the blanket when the monitor let out a sharp burst of static behind her. She turned her head toward it slowly, heart skipping a beat. A voice followed, one she had come to recognize, but this time it sounded less like a whisper and more like a command. "Stay." The monitors. Green light pulsed rapidly, like it was reacting to something unseen in the room. Emily instinctively reached for Ava, but before her hand could reach the crib, the nursery door slammed shut with a deafening thud dot. She spun around, eyes wide, rushing to the door and grabbing the knob. It wouldn't budge. Locked from the outside. Somehow, she pounded on it, screaming, but the rest of the house stayed silent. Behind her, Ava stirred slightly in her crib, but didn't cry. Instead, she looked upward, giggling softly at something only she could see. Emily turned back toward her, panic flooding her chest. The monitor was now glowing faintly red, emitting an eerie hum. She could feel the vibration of it through the floorboards. The room's temperature dropped rapidly, her breath visible in. The air dot shadows began to gather in the corners of the nursery, stretching unnaturally across the walls as if the light itself was being swallowed. Emily backed up against the door, holding Ava, whispering for it all to stop. The monitor crackled again. "You shouldn't have tried to leave." It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a growl layered over something inhuman, deeper and more ancient than anything that belonged in a world of lullabies and nightlights. The air pressed in on her like a physical weight as the walls themselves seemed to breathe around her. Pulsing with unseen life, the nursery window had always been a comfort, letting in just enough moonlight to keep the shadows at bay. But that night, it became something else entirely. As Emily cradled Ava near the crib, still trapped in the locked room with the monitor hissing behind her, her eyes drifted to the window's reflection. At first, it was just her and the baby, a fragile silhouette framed by the silver light. Then, a movement too slow to be accidental, too deliberate to ignore. She blinked and looked closer. Standing just behind her reflection was a figure, tall, motionless, and wrong dot, it had no features. Just the impression of something humanoid. A blur of darkness shaped like a person but lacking definition. its head tilted slightly, watching. Not the baby, her. Emily didn't dare turn around. She stared at the glass, heart hammering, trying to rationalize what she was seeing. A trick of the light. A shadow, something harmless. But then it smiled. Not with a mouth, but with the whole of its presence, a spreading wave of malice that twisted its shape in the reflection like melting wax. The figure leaned closer behind her, its head nearly brushing hers in the glass. Ava looked past her mother's shoulder, smiling again, giggling softly. Emily couldn't breathe. The room grew darker, though no lights had gone out. It was like the shadows were pouring in from the corners, thickening around the crib, crawling slowly up the walls. The figure in the reflection lifted an arm, its hand stretching toward Emily's shoulder. Her skin prickled as though ice was brushing against her neck. Still, she didn't turn around. Her gaze locked with her own reflection, unable to tear herself away as the shape behind her grew clearer, its body pulsing in sync with the monitor's glowing red light.
Please like and subscribe channel Fear Frequency for more horror stories. Thank you.